Imagine you're a young composer and you want to compose a piece. You've heard about chords in your theory lessons, but you're not entirely sure how they relate to the music you play and listen to. So far, music theory has seemed rather abstract, presenting complex ideas in a distilled form. In our previous lesson, for instance, we talked about block chords for choir and keyboard, but instrumental textures are often more complex. Let's explore how simple chords become music. Music is a temporal art. To bring theoretical chords to life means to compose them out over time. Let's bring this thinking to bear on a simple musical fragment that uses just a single chord, an E-flat major triad. What's the simplest way to add interest to this chord? How can we extend it in time? There's no single correct answer to this question, but one common technique is simply to repeat it. In and of itself, this sketch is far from interesting, but if we choose an instrument, say piano, and a time signature, say 3/4, and add a few rests, these two simple chords are transformed into an intriguing two-measure gesture. So how do we continue? We could just keep repeating the same chord, but let's try something a bit more sophisticated. How else can we compose out a simple E-flat major triad? Let's turn to the practice studio. Performers sometimes complain about practicing boring arpeggios, but arpeggios can be musically interesting, and they're a simple and common way of spinning out harmony over time. Arpeggios can be used to showcase virtuosity, as in the tempestuous finale of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, but they can also form the basis of a melody. Here's a little tune with only the notes of an E-flat major triad that uses contour and rhythm to create musical interest. This is probably starting to sound familiar to many of you, and for good reason. If we string together our two excerpts, we get something that looks a lot like the opening of Beethoven's Eroica Symphony. But our excerpt still lacks dynamics and articulation, telling the performer how to perform the notes on the page. These indications are just as important as the notes themselves in shaping a compelling musical journey. Let's try this. The addition of dynamics creates a welcome contrast between measures 1 and 2 and what follows, but this contrast still isn't as effective as it could be. Think about it this way. If we asked a pianist to play a loud E-flat major chord on the piano, would they play the chord in example 4? Not likely. A pianist would intuitively orchestrate the dynamics. In other words, they would fully use the resources of the piano to achieve a forte sound by adding more notes, especially lower ones. Optimizing the musical resources at your disposal to achieve your expressive goals is central to musical craftsmanship. Here's a new version of our sketch, now with fuller orchestration for the piano, tempo markings, and an eighth note accompaniment figure, still using notes of the E-flat major triad above the melody to create more energy. If we keep this discussion of Beethoven's Eroica in mind when we think about music from now on, the underlying chords of complex passages will become more evident, and soon we'll begin to develop a mental database of various textures that composers use to spin out harmony in time. To that end, we'll finish this lesson with a preliminary list of such techniques: sustain, repetition, and arpeggiation. There are many ways to sustain chords. The most obvious is simply to hold the sound with no movement whatsoever, as in this example by Beethoven. Another option is to create a stratified texture by introducing the notes of a sustained chord one at a time, as in the Temple of Time from The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. One of the most common forms of arpeggiation, and also one of the simplest, is Alberti bass technique, as used in this famous C major sonata by Mozart. The common Alberti bass figure here is outlined in red. Arpeggiation can also be used to create waves of sound, as in this example from Chopin's C minor Etude. Rhythm provides an important tool for composers to add interest when repeating chords, as in the iconic opening of John Williams' Imperial March from Star Wars, which oscillates between two different sonorities. Composers can also stratify repeated textures so as to occupy more musical space, as is often done in waltz-like figurations, like the one found in Willkommen from Cabaret. More sophisticated textures can be created by combining two or more methods, as in the following example from the first movement of William Grant Still's First Symphony, which combines sustained and repeated chords to create a richly textured accompaniment figure. Or this agitated opening from Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor that combines arpeggiation and repetition to create one of the piece's principal motives. Although we've singled out specific techniques for composing out chords, these techniques are anything but discrete. In practice, composers combine them in various ways to create rich musical tapestries that ebb and flow over time. Ultimately, a composer's imagination is the only limit to invention.